Good evening. Today, we are going to take an early bird overview of the brand new Bigfoot documentary from director Ronnie Ferguson, Bigfoot and Marty. The documentary explores the work of two-time UP poet laureate and Bigfoot poet Marty Achatz. The film features poetry readings by Mr. Achatz, as well as candid interviews with Bigfoot experts and other mystery hunters at the 2021 UP Bigfoot Conference, including well-known personalities from the cryptozoological field like Ken Gerhard. Tonight on Mysterious Library.
Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to Mysterious Library. I'm one of your hosts, Dean Bertram, and joining me is the always astute and handsome Jason McLean. How are you
How you
keeping
doing,
warm?
Dean?
I'm good. Are you warm down in Texas? I'm freezing up here in the North Woods.
Well, okay, so we're not as cold as y'all are, but yeah, we're in the 20s. We're basically covered in ice down here in the DFW. So I mean, it's not as bad as it was in 2021, but yeah, we're cold. But again, it gets cold here for a couple days, maybe a week at most, and then we're back to normal. So yeah, but I'm right there with Horace. Like, I wouldn't mind a thicker coat right now. All I'm saying. I know my dog wouldn't.
And he's right. It is a good night to listen to Mysterious Library. And so, hello, Horace, and hello, Joe, two of our most regular and loyalist listeners, viewers. It's fantastic to have you both here.
Hmm.
So, what else happened today other than ice covering down in Texas way? Anything else exciting in the life of Mr. McLean?
Well, my wife was inspired by today's topic and decided to write a Bigfoot haiku in
Wow.
in order to commemorate tonight's topic. So let me pull this up. A shadow comes forth. A scream in the night rings out. My selfie was blurred.
Fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm interested. I did not know what I was in store for with this particular documentary, so I'm actually kind of excited to talk about it tonight. Dean, anything new with you since we've all been together last?
I think incredibly exciting. I was concerned this morning because I'm on a weird dual fuel system here in the North Woods, and
Oh
they
yeah.
turn the electricity off. I mean the heating system off. But I'm not so used to it. I'm kind
Oh
of still new here, and I have a
yeah.
wood furnace anyway. But I'm about to take my daughter out to a homeschool group,
Hmm.
and I'm conscious that the temperature in the house is dropping because I haven't started the furnace in the morning. The wood furnace burns out
Right.
overnight, and I'm not going to be here, so I'm not going to start. And I'm like, our house is down to the 50s and dropping. If I go out today and this electricity stays off, I'll come home to frozen pipes and Lord knows what else.
Yeah.
So And then as a catch-22, I have to start the wood furnace, but I don't like leaving the wood furnace unattended because you always see in this part of the world burnt
Yeah.
down houses from chimney fires. Like, it's quite regular to be driving the back
Oh, yeah.
roads here, and what happened to
Absolutely.
that house? Oh, it's burnt down. Oh, chimney fire. So I don't like don't like leaving my furnace raging when I'm not at home. But it was that or the frozen pipe, so I rolled the dice. Thankfully, my house was here when I got home. I did say a prayer and thank God for that because I was
Yes.
all day I was like, "Don't have a chimney fire while I'm not there. Don't have a chimney fire while I'm not there."
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. You would now I know a lot of chimney fires come from the creosote buildup over time
That's correct.
versus, an overall design flaw, but you'd think they would have a slightly different setup to make them slightly safer to leave over long periods of time like that.
It probably is. I'm probably just a paranoid Australian. People here probably do it all the time. I've just heard about it happening too often. And I get my chimney cleaned, of course, at the beginning of every season by a professional
Yeah.
chimney sweep. But still, the paranoia is real when my
Oh,
furnace is
yeah.
going.
Well, so here's the thing. As a North Texan, we almost never have to use our fireplace. Like we could use it if we wanted to, but it's most like the ones we have are entirely decorative. Now, the one I had growing up with my dad's house was a larger one, but it was a gas one. But again, we didn't use it often enough for the creosote buildup to be a thing. I genuinely did not know until I was in my teens that chimney sweeps were an actual thing, like that were still around. I knew they were a thing way back in the day, but I was like, "Oh, but that's all done, right? Like, it's gone." No, it's
Yeah.
still I didn't realize that it was a big industry because so many people still have to use, fireplaces and burn, um, coal, wood, to actually heat their home. Like, I didn't realize that was as big of a thing as it is
My
until I
chimney
was, like, in my
sweep all
teens.
Yeah, my chimney sweep always chides me. He's like, "Have you been burning those anti-creosote logs?" I'm like, "Yeah, you told me to. I burnt one last season." He's like, "One? You need to be burning one every couple of weeks. And do you leave the flue, like, almost closed?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's right." "No, you have to keep it open halfway open like this or there'll be more creosote." I'm like, "I don't know any of this, man." He gets mad because it's the creosote buildup gets bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a serious thing. Like, I remember reading, my mother was a huge fan of mysteries. I remember reading, Sherlock Holmes for the first time and seeing the how much the creosote played into these stories. And I mean, they used it as a fuel source, which didn't make it. I was like, well, hold on, but if creosote's this byproduct, but and it's really remarkably flammable. Again, hence all the burning homes. So it's a serious thing, man. It's one of those weird things that we never stop to think. If it's not a part of your life, if it's not part of your everyday life, you just don't think about it.
Yeah, makes me wanna burst into that old Mary Poppins song. I better not do it or YouTube might flag us for music violation, but you know that Shim
Yep.
Shiminy song?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I alm I you almo
Hmm.
everybody almost got a couple bars of it, and then I thought, "No, better not, we'll get flagged." So,
I think we could probably get away with a few bars.
I don't know, who knows? I don't wanna get us fired any sooner than we need to from Untold Radio, so,
That's probably true. I
yeah.
mean, don't get me wrong. The pink slips are probably in the mail, but yeah, might as well get another couple episodes out of it, I suppose.
Yeah, it could be the final one if I burst into song for several reasons. Copyright violation and my tone deaf lack of ability to sing. We'll lose our whole
Yep,
audience right there and then.
exactly. So, yeah, no, like I said, outside of just the fact that it's gotten cold, and my wife was inspired to do some humorous haiku for today's
God
show.
bless her.
Not much over here.
Say thank you to her for doing a little haiku for us.
I will. It's actually kind of inspired her. She wants to go ahead and do an entire humorous book of cryptid poetry.
There you
Just
go.
because for her, like she really likes haikus because essentially it's a math problem for her. So she's gonna do that now, just have fun. She's like, so you need to tell me what all these cryptids do and all this. She's like, I don't even know. But she's just inspired to have fun with it. So
And you and I didn't talk about the film at all. Didn't know your wife had
mm-mm.
written a haiku. I'm guessing she watched it with you and she was inspired by.
She
watching
was
the
inspired by
documentary?
me talking about it with
Oh,
her.
okay.
Yeah, she was working while I was watching it, and
Gotcha.
well, we were both working, but I was listening to it, and I was telling her about what was going on, and she was inspired.
Oh, excellent. It's an inspiring movie. I mean, I obviously love this film because I selected it as the head of programming at MidWest WeirdFest, which takes place in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, March 3 to 5 this year, the 7th annual. It's loaded with all kinds of fantastic paranormal and UFO
Mhm.
documentaries, horror films, underground films, weird documentaries, all kinds of stuff. But I mean, I obviously loved it because I programmed it for the festival. I loved how it's a Bigfoot documentary, but it's not a Bigfoot
It's
documentary.
not yeah,
It's
it's not.
both. It's kind of both, because it has the
Mhm,
researchers that he's talking to at the that Ronnie Ferguson's interviewing, the
mhm.
director of the documentary at the
Yep.
UP Bigfoot Conference or whatever it is in 2021, and then it's got
Mhm.
its main subject, which is Marty Achatz, the UP poet laureate who also writes Bigfoot poetry.
Yeah.
So it's obviously something, but before I talk more about it because I'm
Mhm.
the person who programmed it and suggested we do it for the show. What did you think about the film? Let's hear your take on it, Jason.
So, let me start at the beginning, sort of the aesthetics. Like, last week, we talked about MUFON's newest one, right? Which, again, highly recommend. Um, to compare the 2, that one almost feels like what you'd see on something like the History Channel, like, it's a more polished more of an honestly, more of an infomercial kind of a thing, right? I don't really wanna call it a docu I mean, yeah, technically it's a documentary, but it feels more like an infomercial in that way where it's very slick, everyone's sitting down for interviews, it's more 60 minutes, right, kind of a thing, whereas this really reminds me more of an actual proper documentary where someone is going out into the world and observing people in the real world doing real things and recording them as it's happening. That's so this felt more like a real documentary to me.
Oh, that's good. I love to. I mean, stylistically, I had Ronnie Ferguson on. If people are interested in the film, they should go back and visit Talking Weird from a couple weeks
Mhm.
ago, also on the Untold Radio Network, because I interviewed Ronnie on that. And one of the things I loved about it, as well, is similar to what you said, is there's almost an anti-aesthetic in it. Like it's intentionally
Yeah.
shot in a very naturalistic verite kind of way. While today,
Mhm.
if you watch, as I do, because I'm fascinated in documentaries, if you watch how to make documentary things on YouTube, or you're watching the young hip YouTube documentarians,
Mhm.
a lot of these people are obsessed with almost image over actual content. Like what matters to them most is pulling off a beautiful drone shot or a really gorgeous
Mhm.
camera move. It seems like if you go to YouTube and search how to make a documentary, half of it's going to be tech driven. While this movie isn't tech driven
Right.
at all. This is
No.
Ronnie with a camera talking to people, following his subjects. And there's a real charm to it because it feels just
Mhm.
so naturalistic. It's a bit of a it's very different from somebody who's used to watching young hip image-driven documentarians. There's a big difference in the style there. So I
Yeah.
I I just dug that aesthetically because I
Yeah.
like that old analog style of, not being so obsessed with the slickness, which is
W
kind of an
My
illness
favorite
today,
part
I think.
yeah, yeah, no, to your point, my favorite part of the entire film is when, Marty is trying to read a poem in front of these crashing waves, and he stops and like, "Let's try it again." He goes again, and then they finally just take him inside so he can read, and they leave that there. It's I mean, okay, found footage is more of a newer idea, but if you grew up or you watched a lot of documentaries in the 90s where they had that very guerrilla feel, that's what this is. Because I was watching, like, this feels like a proper documentary, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you said, it's almost an anti technical or anti aesthetic where it's
Yeah.
just somebody out there with a camcorder running around, running up on people, um, and having that conversation. The sound isn't like the sound again. This is not a critique. It's actually a to my point of or to your point really of the anti aesthetic. The sound's crap. on this.
In that scene particularly, the scene on
Yeah.
Lake Michigan, or was it Lake Superior? I should know, I live in Wisconsin, I always get the
Yeah.
lakes confused. But they're
I
obviously
couldn't
on the
tell you.
shore of one of these lakes in
Yeah.
wintertime, and Marty Achatz is reading one of his Bigfoot
Mhm.
poems, and the wind's horrible, and so the director cuts, says, "We're gonna have to go again," and it goes again, and then the guy's being blasted with, like,
Mhm.
frozen snow, and they cut
Yeah.
again, and they cut again, and then finally it cuts to his car, and he reads the whole thing. It's almost like something out of a Christopher Guest movie. You know, the guy who
Yeah.
does, like, the Spinal Tap
Mhm.
movies, and it almost
Exactly.
feels like it almost feels like it is comedic, but there's comedy in the natural moment rather than a
Mhm.
staged comedy. Like, it's again, it's the
Yes.
humanness of that really
Mhm.
naturalistic. You can find great humor in real situations, and
Oh, absolutely.
that moment in the documentary, I was just laughing heartily while I was watching that.
Mhm. So, yeah, no, again, it's a like you said, that's where the humor is. But like I said, the sound quality, it sounds like like it's just people with, again, a camcorder talking to somebody in the real world. It
Mhm.
isn't polished. They're not messing with it to give you a better quality. Again, if you were watching these low budget documentaries in the 90s where it was just, you know, kids in a dream kind of a thing, right? That's what this is. That's exactly what this is. And so there is that rawness to it that as a minimalist, I really like from an artistic perspective. So it's, where like you said, it has to focus on the content more than the aesthetic. Whereas a lot of new stuff, like to your point, it is about how it looks, how it sounds. Everything's got to have the slick cutaways. It's got the, this is 60 minutes, thing.
Right.
Um, and the interviews where everyone's sitting down in a sound stage and sounds perfect, and you have the quick cut, and it's the I'm going to say this, then this guy's going to say this, and it's going to come back, and we're going to juxtapose it. And it's really meticulous. This is just, you can tell they're clearly editing around things, but not to the same degree. You're getting a lot of just the raw situation. So yeah, my first thought on this was just the aesthetics it just feels like an actual documentary.
Yeah, I love that as well. That's what struck me, and also, of course, the main subject, Marty Achatz, the poet,
Mhm,
he's just fascinating, and to hear him read his poetry about Bigfoot, which is so sincere and so well written, but it's not a subject you would ever
mhm.
think that a serious poet would tackle.
Yeah,
And why I think it's so important is we'll get to the actual UFO investigators perhaps, in a bit, as not the UFO, sorry, the Bigfoot investigators and
right.
researchers are in a bit, but to stick with the main subject for a moment is that I'm somebody who has a background in looking at the culture which grew up around ufology as well as the
Mhm,
culture which impacted ufology. So you can't
right.
write about ufology, I don't think you can, or understand it, if
Mm,
you don't talk about science fiction and if you don't talk about the other artistic or commercial cultures which
mhm.
sprung up around it. But that's not something which is often talked about Bigfoot. It's
It's
not
not.
normally situated the way UFO belief is. One of the things I
Oh, Dean?
if I did I freeze then? I couldn't see
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
for a
you
moment.
you you froze up for a little bit.
Okay, what I was saying is, what I love about this documentary, while it does talk about Bigfoot, it's not so much a documentary about the creature Bigfoot, it's about
Mm-mm.
people who believe in Bigfoot and the way that it impacts people, looking at a number of different people in interviews, but primarily looking at the poet Marty Achatz and how he himself says Bigfoot becomes this kind of metaphor for
Yes.
everybody's Bigfoot, this dark thing which is always out of our sight, but always haunting us. I think he says, just, behind the tree line. So whether he cites things like whether it's
Yeah,
depression or addiction or death, these things which haunt us, and they're never really tangible, but they're always there.
yeah,
And so everybody has a Bigfoot. So that's the way that he's kind of, I suppose, to approach the phenomena and what the phenomenon means to him. And he's somebody who's genuinely interested in Bigfoot. Like, he has Bigfoot
yeah.
casts, and I think he's been out looking for Bigfoot, and he lives in an area of the world which is
Mhm.
supposedly, rife with Bigfoot sightings, the Upper
Yep.
Peninsula. But to see how Bigfoot becomes this cultural phenomenon through this man's poetry and the way that it has impacted him, then I think when you start looking, when they
Mhm.
start interviewing the other Bigfoot researchers and investigators, you can kind of step outside of talking about the reality of the phenomenon for a minute and look at the reality of
Yeah,
the cultural phenomenon that's Bigfoot,
right.
regardless of the monster in the woods, how this has impacted people's lives. And I don't think I've seen a Bigfoot documentary that deals with that. I've seen UFO stuff and I've read
Mhm.
UFO stuff which deals with it, but I don't think I've seen a Bigfoot doco that does it like this.
No, there are a few out there that kind of take that approach where it's more about the people looking for Bigfoot than about Bigfoot itself. But to your point, this one is very much about the culture of it, right? Versus people actually being out in the woods looking for it. Bigfoot Odyssey used to talk. That's kind of what they used to do before we lost Carrie. Is that he would go in the woods, but again, the documentary was about them looking for Bigfoot, but it was still about the people. Whereas this takes a similar, tack where it's saying, "Hey, let's look at the people who are in this field." But it's not even the researchers per se; it's the people, right? Again, Marty being the primary focus and sort of the driving narrative of this. And then we get, these other experiencers, and there's really only, I think, two real researchers that they talk to, Ken and the other gentleman whose name I can never remember. The problem is I know him. He has a very lovely wife. They're beautiful people. I just cannot remember his name. I can never remember his name to save my life. He's
Is that
with
the Kentucky? Is
Kentucky.
that the guy
Yeah.
from Kentucky? Yeah, and they also talk to, geez, I should know him, we're friends on Facebook, the guy who's part of a Wisconsin kind of
Oh, yeah,
Bigfoot
yeah, yeah.
it's called CAPS or something, and
Something like that.
as well as those
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
that husband and wife team from Wisconsin that have,
Oh, that's right.
what is it called? It's like, documenting the phenomenon or documenting the strange or
Hmm.
something is their website, but you're right, there's a lot of people they talk to, and you can see the culture of Bigfoot
Hmm.
in their behavior. An example is one of the early interviewees, who I think is actually friends with Marty, who does all this Bigfoot type art saying Bigfoot is a friendly giant of the forest, Bigfoot loves
Hmm.
you. And that also shows that when you and it's not something which is talked about that much by people in the community, but these people have clearly developed ideas about Bigfoot, right or wrong,
Right.
based on something beyond just a cryptozoological interest in an animal. When you're doing
Yeah.
artwork saying Bigfoot loves you, Bigfoot is a gentle giant of the forest, you're probably more influenced by Harry and the Hendersons than you are by, a Peter Byrne book.
Yeah. So can we can we stay on, because I was thinking about bringing that in a little later in
Sure.
the episode, but I mean, we're 22 minutes into it. Um, I'm perfectly okay with going ahead and kind of diverting a little bit away from the actual film itself for just a moment. One of the things I think the film does a great job of catching, again, from that cultural perspective, right? And sort of the people's thoughts about it. And we've had this discussion, is how in a lot of ways, for a lot of people, Bigfoot is a religion, or it takes sort of that a very religious overtones to the approach, to their view of the phenomena. And I think this movie it doesn't necessarily, the film doesn't necessarily focus on it, but it does show you that this is the thing. And to your point, if you're running around making artwork talking about how this is, the Bigfoot is the, you said, is the friend of the forest. Even Marty talks about in several of the poems where he's almost talking about him like it is its own deity, right? Again, I think he means it more as a metaphor, but when he's talking, like, there's a poem where he talks about the creation of Bigfoot, right, on the eighth day, right, and it's like there's a lot of, it's not just the fact that it even starts off with Genesis 6. And that's something we can talk about later, but it's like those even, but when you see these other people, again, the people who are creating artwork, the people who are doing, there is this religious sort of attachment to Bigfoot, and it's definitely, you feel it in a lot of these interviews, and that is definitely something that that's there. And like you said, because this focuses more on the culture around Bigfoot and around the search for him rather than the actual researchers searching for Bigfoot, you get, I think, a lot more of that sort of feeling, and that sort of, the almost religious aspect of this, and again, where Bigfoot is the focus of almost religious thought, than you get with a lot of these other documentaries, where because they do try and take it more from a scientific perspective. This is saying, hey, let's look at these people, what they're doing, and how they're approaching it, and it does deal with that in a very real way.
I think Ronnie Ferguson is very clever in his direction. He's very sympathetic to Bigfoot
Mhm.
believers. Like, when we're talking about it, it clearly looks at the culture. Ronnie
Mhm.
Ferguson, the director, never steps in and says, "We're looking at Bigfoot culture and what these people believe."
Right.
He lets the people speak for himself. I think he's quite
Yeah.
generous with his questioning. And I think he's quite generous with the
He is.
way that he lets the interviews with the people play out for minutes at a time. He isn't just cutting out like a snippet to prove his point. He's
Yes.
showing these interviews, but he
Mhm.
also, I think he's conscious, and I didn't talk to him. I should have asked him this when I interviewed him. I will at MidWest WeirdFest because both him and Marty Achatz are coming, and they'll present the
Mhm.
film and Q&A afterwards. But I think he's very conscious of the religiosity. As you said at the beginning, the film starts
Mhm.
with Genesis 6:4 quote on the screen, and the
Yeah.
film ends with, this isn't really a spoiler because we're not, it's not the type of thing which is a spoiler, but it does give you a sense of perhaps what the director
Yep.
was thinking. The film ends with Marty Achatz being the main subject again, the poet, being interviewed in his church because he
Yeah.
plays organ for, and that's a great revelation as well late in the movie. Oh, he plays organ for his local church as well. Like,
Yes.
so it
Mhm.
ends in a church. It begins with Genesis 6:4, and maybe that was intentional, maybe it wasn't, but I think it definitely does suggest that there's a religiosity to this type of belief system.
Yeah. No, and yeah, I did notice how they were the further we get into it, just focusing on Marty for a second, his religious views sort of keep popping up, right? The name of the group, of the music group, there's it's like these are clearly religious people. Um, Although I honestly, the more I listen to how to a lot of to his poetry and some of the titles of his other books, I kind of want to sit down and it's like, what exactly are your religious views on this? Like, I don't think he's out there worshiping Bigfoot or anything like that, but I have a distinct feeling that some of his I would just like I get the feeling this may be some he may have some non-traditional views on a few things. Just the feeling that I'm getting, but to your point, yeah, I mean it's built up in there. Again, he's playing an organ, right? For his church. A lot of the interviews are happening in this church. It's not they're not they're not shying away from that aspect, but they're kind of bringing it in. Again, the creation of Bigfoot poem begins on the eighth day. Like there's a lot there that I think the filmmaker isn't shying away from on this. And to your point, he lets people talk. He's not doing the um the quick cutaways and I'm just going to take this guy, I'm just going to take this. Like Ken Gerhard talks for a long time. Like everyone gets a chance to really sort of talk and express a lot of thoughts, more than just on Bigfoot specifically. Like it gets out there a little bit. Like he's allowing people to really express themselves. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, for people who are used to a History Channel type, documentary format, you can have an expert on that show and you can see them for 10 seconds in that show and that's it. Because they want the soundbite of him saying, well, maybe it really was aliens from the moon. And that's all they
Yeah.
wanted him to say. So that's the soundbite from the guy, right? This isn't that kind
Hmm.
of documentary where all he
No.
wanted somebody to say was, I think Bigfoot's friendly. And so he would just cut the, I think
Yeah.
Bigfoot's friendly. And that would prove it. No, the person would talk for, they'd be allowed to say their piece. And that
Yeah.
gives you a better idea of the culture. So again, this is, I think, something more interested in the people than trying to prove a point regarding Bigfoot. It's not trying to make any claims whether Bigfoot's real or not real. The director certainly isn't hostile to the idea that
Hmm.
Bigfoot might be real because I've interviewed him and I can tell
Hmm.
even before I interviewed him, I could tell from the film. But he wants people to be able to say what they think about Bigfoot and he allows them to do it.
I think again, back to sort of the anti aesthetic of it. One of the things I really liked was when they were going. It happens later in the film. They're looking at the casts, right, and how the camera looks at the named or the tags for each of these Bigfoot, alleged Bigfoot casts of footprints and handprints and different things, they're handwritten on lined notebook paper. And it's not in like the areas that a lot of these things are occurring in. These are, again, this isn't a well-funded, shiny whiz bang over. It's like, this is, you really get the feeling that these are normal, everyday people who have jobs. They're just trying to do the best they can with this, right? There is that very intimate relationship there, where again, everything's done by hand, right? It's not a big over the top production. They don't have the money to do, not the filmmakers, but the people doing this. They don't have those kinds of resources. And because of that, it does, you get to feel what it's like to be with these people. These are one of my big problems with the new comic conventions, and I've talked about this for a long time with my friends. The first comic convention I remember going to was 1992. It was literally in a hotel. It was um, one of the ballrooms, right? And it was just a bunch of people who had their long boxes set up, and you could go, and it was just the people, right? Everything was done by hand because people. And you go now, and everything's this big, over the top, highly produced. Hollywood's there, and people have spent all this money on cosplay, where they've bought everything online that was made by a $10,000 or $20,000 3D printer that's been computer modeled, and it's film accurate. Whereas you go back, and people were having to make this stuff by hand. They were sewing it together by hand out of love, versus the commercialization of it. Those scenes for me were very touching, because it reminds me of the actual human beings doing this out of love for this, which kind of goes back to the religious part we were talking about. It's like, this really isn't a very this is, contrary to popular belief, this is not a lucrative field for anybody. If you're doing this, you believe in this straight up, and you really get. I think the movie does a great job of getting that across with those little moments of, like, here's these handwritten on college ruled notebook paper, cards telling you what you're looking at.
Yeah, it is lovely, that aspect of seeing the reality of the culture. Speaking about comic book conventions, just quickly as a funny aside, I remember when I went to my first one as a teenager, and all it was geeky teenage boys like me and
Hmm.
old, nerdy guys who never had a date in their life. And I haven't been to one as an adult. And
Yep.
now I look at the footage though of Comic-Con, I'm thinking, where are all these gorgeous cosplay girls dressed up as Dark Phoenix and Harlequin when I
Hmm.
was a boy? There wasn't a girl in the room. It was a very different
No.
time.
Yeah. It's yeah. The commercialization. I hate it when I hate saying things like this, but the commercialization has really killed a lot of this. Where it's, you know, again, I'm not gonna say that all these girls aren't necessarily fans, right? Because I know plenty who are. They legitimately are fans.
I just wish those girls had been
But
around when I was in high school, so they were that's what I'm saying. I wish when I was a
yeah.
high school kid going to Comic-Cons, again, I haven't been to one as an adult. I wish it wasn't just other nerdy boys like me and nerdy
Hmm.
old guys. I wish there'd
Yeah.
been teenage girls my age running around, or 20-year-olds, whatever, running around for me to look at as a teenage boy and go, "Wow, she looks just like Dark Phoenix," or
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh
I would
yeah.
have
No,
loved that as a
I'm right there
teenager.
with you. It's like, where the heck were these chicks when I was, 16, 17, going to these things? But yeah, I mean, a lot of it's commercialization. Yeah, okay, there's some other commentary there. But yeah, it goes back to the point. You get to feel this very intimate aspect of this part of it. They don't spend a lot of time trying to, like you said, he doesn't, the filmmaker specifically is not going out of his way to force any thoughts in your head on any of this. It's just there. You can take it if you want. You don't have to take it, right? Um I think one of the things that kept popping out to me is the choice of locations for interviews for Marty specifically. So there's the times at the church, but then there's sometimes where it looks like he's just in his kitchen, but it's clearly a very small kitchen. It's not a. This is not. These and maybe it's not even his kitchen. Maybe it is the kitchen of like the church that he's in, right? They have these little kitchenettes. I'm not, but the locations are very clearly not wealthy locations. They're not, again, it's not overly produced. If you grew up on the lower end of the economic scale like I did, you recognize a lot of this stuff. You recognize sort of the area, like this is very much on the lower end of the middle class. All right, there's middle class, then there's that lower end middle class where you're sort of bouncing in between. That's where this is taking place, and it does a good job of sort of conveying that sense to it.
Yeah, it has an atmosphere because it shows those things. Another atmosphere I think it evokes very well, because it's almost another character in the film, is the UP itself, the Upper
Yeah.
Peninsula of
Hmm.
Michigan itself. They make a point a number of times talking about how often Bigfoot's seen there and also how difficult it is to live
Oh yeah.
there. And then Bigfoot becomes somehow everybody has a Bigfoot, I think Marty says, because everybody
Yeah.
has that difficulty of dealing with the isolation of living in the Upper
Hmm.
Peninsula. But when they're outside shooting, for example, that time we talked about before when Marty is doing his poem
Yeah.
on the edge of one of the Great Lakes, and the weather's so bad they have to go into his car. But we also see a lot of other outside, weather
Hmm.
at that kind of time of the year, and we see a guy
Yeah.
surfing
Yeah.
on the lake. It's so cold, there is growing off of his, like, eyelashes, these icicles so he can't see. They interview him, and he's like, "Yeah,
Mhm.
the surf's great, but as you can see, I can't even see out there." And sure enough, he's got this block of ice growing
Yeah.
over his
On his
eye,
Yeah.
and so you get this sense of this, yeah, you get a sense of place. I love documentaries where you get a sense of place, and this gives you that sense of place as well.
Yeah, no, it's again, it does a great job of that. And the Upper Peninsula is not something I'm overly familiar with in a lot of ways. Um, I've never been up there. It's just not necessarily it's not really something I'm overly familiar with. So I was really kind of intrigued just to see what it looked like. What is the trees. I mean, you kind of know it's Michigan's Michigan, but it's you get it, right? But you get to feel the atmosphere.
Right, and
Um
the UP is a different part of Michigan, of course,
yeah,
because the UP
it
is
is.
kind of above Wisconsin. It's almost like northern Wisconsin, while
Right.
the other part of Michigan is on the other
Mhm.
side of Lake Michigan, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of
Mhm.
the UP is almost its own
Mhm.
little place. There's I
You
have
know
we
why
talked about it on this show? There's that deer hunting movie, what is it called?
oh,
Escabana in the Moonlight or whatever, which takes place in the
I couldn't tell
UP.
you. Yeah, I know what
Yeah.
you're talking about. Yeah.
But I haven't been there. I know lot because I live in Wisconsin, so I know lots of people who go there all the time. But
Mhm.
my understanding is it is almost like its own country up there. It's
Yeah.
very different from the rest of the state of Michigan.
You know why that's there, don't you? Like why that's part of Michigan? Because you're right. You look at like, why is this a part of Michigan? The This is literally the only thing I really know about Michigan. Uh, it is the Battle of Toledo. That there was a fight over the port city of Toledo, and the two states were fighting over it. And so that was part of the resolution was that Michigan got the Upper Peninsula for its resources and access to water. And so that's why that's a part of Michigan was to sort of keep everybody happy over this fight. I know it's weird for us to think of people fighting over the city of Toledo, but it was a big deal. It was like the mid 1800s, I believe, and they were going at it, and because both states wanted Toledo.
Huh. See, I'm the American historian, and I live in Wisconsin, but you know more about this than I do. Horace Smith let us know the actual name of that movie, and it's, uh, Escanaba in the Moonlight, and I always pronounce it wrong, but it's a top movie if anybody wants to see a wonderful
never
movie
actually seen
set
it, but
near
I'm aware of
UP.
it, yeah.
It's great. It's got aliens and deer hunting and all kinds of weirdness in it. And Horace says the Superior State. Horace Smith also asked, who's a good friend of the show. Jason and I have
Mhm.
interviewed him together on Talking Weird. He's also Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State
Yep.
University. He asked, maybe I missed this, but is it known when Bigfoot and Marty will be available for those who, to their deep regret, won't be able to attend a Midwest WeirdFest? Well, I'm pretty sure sometime in the following year it will get a commercial release. I'll certainly make a point that we can
Mhm.
announce it on this show, but I'll let you know personally, Horace, as soon as I find out when it has a commercial release. It's doing the festival type circuit at the moment, I believe.
Yep. And Horace is mentions that they're still they're plotting to sneak up and take Toledo again. So, you know what? As a Texan, I understand. I'm just saying there's I'm not saying which state, but they know who they are. Just saying we
Uh,
uh we have plans. We have thoughts. We have ideas.
well, you, of
Just
course, were
saying.
the only state that was its own nation. And that's
Yep.
one of the things I love about Texas is the beer Lone Star,
Mhm.
one of my favorite beers. It's the national beer of Texas. It's not the state beer of Texas. It's the national beer of
National beer.
Texas.
Yes, it is. Yep. No, it's yeah, Texas is its own thing in a lot of ways.
I love the
So
great state of Texas. I could live there quite happily.
I imagine you could. And here's the thing. You wouldn't necessarily need to worry about creosote.
You know what? I probably wouldn't. Although I would. I have family in Houston. It's where my father lived before he passed, and it's where
Mm.
my stepmother and my half brothers still live. I also have a niece there. But they get brutal weather there, man. They get like
Mhm.
storms where their power's out for ages,
Oh yeah.
and also the summer
Yep.
in. I'm from Sydney, so I'm used to heat. But the summer heat in Houston is insufferable. You go out if you
It
go
is
out to Sydney at
terrible.
10 o'clock at night, normally a
Yeah.
southerly, what we call a southerly breeze has come through and cooled things
Mhm.
down. I remember going out, to the bar scene back in the day when I was in my old man's house in Houston. I walked
Mhm.
out of that house at 10 o'clock at night to go there. The humidity was so high, I felt like I needed a shower like 2 minutes later. Like
Yes.
it was a I mean, Sydney's bad,
Mhm.
but it's nothing like that.
Mm-mm. Oh no. North Texas does. I mean, we've got a lot more water up here now, and there's a lot more concrete. So the humidity has gotten worse during my lifetime, but it's nothing like Houston. Like in Galveston, I went down one summer and just yeah, you're just soaking wet, just walking outside. You're like, what is this? Why you start to question whether oxygen even exists in that atmosphere, and you're just not just wading through water. No, I get it. So come to North Texas. We've got the best of both worlds here. That's all I'm saying.
I'll have to come down for a visit one day anyway. I'd like to do that.
Yeah. And we'll take you out to Brown Springs,
Okay, I'm not.
which is in Oklahoma,
Oh,
which
okay. Which is the state you're eyeing, is that your point my point or your point for
I'm not saying, but it's definitely on our list. Just saying.
oh, I would certainly like to visit. And why aren't you coming to Midwest WeirdFest this year? Horace Smith isn't coming, you're not coming. I
I
hope some of
and
the audience is coming to Midwest
yeah,
WeirdFest.
I'm gonna try and make it next year. This is a bad year for me. I've got a lot going on. Sadly, I really
I
do
know
have a
that
lot
feeling.
going on this year. So hopefully, though, next year I will be there, and for reasons.
Look who just said hello, Martin Achatz, the
Oh,
main subject of Bigfoot and Marty says, "Hey, Dean and Jason, enjoying the conversation. Thank you so much
well, thank you.
for joining us. We enjoy the film Bigfoot and Marty very much, your poetry, and I'm looking very forward to meeting you in person at Midwest WeirdFest."
Yeah, no, I'm yes. Okay, so Texas Jack's talking about the Gulf Coast, but yeah, thank you, Marty. I didn't realize you were watching.
I
So
didn't either. It's great
yeah,
he's here.
I'm glad I had only good things to say so
Yeah,
far.
just as well we liked the film. That would have been
Yeah,
horrible if we didn't like the film.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Now
the
I can't say what I
nuisance
really thought about this. No, I
No, I know you
I
liked
really
it, I
liked
could
the
tell.
film. I was impressed. Again, the essay, all the things we've talked about. Well, yeah. Again, I know Dean's excited to see you and meet you. I honestly wish I could be there this year. I just can't. This is a bad year for me.
Well, maybe you and Horace can both get there next
There
year.
you go.
I'll have to do some kind of special deal for Untold Radio listeners or something. I'd have to work something out by the following year.
Yeah,
It's a good
I like
idea.
it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah. So yeah, no, next year I will definitely find a reason or a way to be there. Not even a reason. Just unfortunately, this is a very bad year for me for
Oh,
travel.
oh, I
So
understand. I'm quite often in that situation anyway. No, but I
mhm.
enjoyed the film a lot, as we were saying. You seem to have enjoyed it
Yeah.
a lot as well. What do you think it says about the Bigfoot community other than what we've talked about? Do you think there's any takeaways from it? Because you're more part of the Bigfoot
Uh,
community than I am. I'm not saying
yeah.
you definitely certainly you go to conventions and you
Oh
have
yeah.
books which deal with Bigfoot, and I'm totally on the sidelines as
Yeah.
far as the community goes.
Yeah. No, no, no. I don't think that there's anything more I can necessarily add except for maybe this. It's a very, very honest look at it. It doesn't go in I don't think it goes necessarily, it doesn't go in a lot of depth per se as far as inner workings of things, but that's not what the filmmaker's trying to do. But I do think you very much get a sense for the people who are involved and why they're involved and how this has impacted their lives. And again, for a lot of these people are people who've had encounters where they're like, what was that? What is this? How do I come to terms with what has just happened to me? And that is something that pops up a lot throughout the film, are people saying, what do I do with this thing that isn't supposed to exist? I've had an encounter with something that's not supposed to be here, something I'm told isn't here, and yet here it is. And I think that that is, again, I mentioned earlier, there is very much a religious aspect to the whole Bigfoot, community in a lot of ways. I think part of it is because for a lot of people, it's almost a, let's to draw a religious equivalent, Saul on the road to Damascus event. You live your entire life believing, maybe there's something out there, maybe there isn't, right? Regardless of what you think, but it's like, okay, but it's not really a serious thing. Then you hear something you can't explain, something that's very out of the norm, or you see something that's very out of the norm, and you're like, "What is this?" How a lot it's a traumatic experience for a lot of people because they're like, "What is this universe that I now live in? Because this isn't supposed to be a part of it." Like I've talked to people. I mean, I've talked to people in the Bigfoot community. We'll stick there. It's radically changed their lives because they're like, if this thing is real, and I know it's real because I've encountered it, what else is real? What else do I believe about the nature of the universe that is completely wrong? And so I think that is what kind of lends the entire, community sort of go down semi-religious paths on as far as how to address this topic. It is one of the Bigfoot is one of those things like UFOs and paranormal phenomena that calls this sort of very the very mainstream, popularized viewpoint of the world into question, and forces people to ask questions about themselves, about the nature of reality, about the nature of God, that they probably weren't even necessarily willing to ask, but now they've been forced into that position.
Yeah, there's actually in the documentary when Ronnie Ferguson is interviewing your friend from Kentucky Bigfoot. You said you
Yeah,
forgot his name before, but you knew him. He
yeah,
actually says there's a woman over there who's never told her report to
yeah,
anybody. It's never been recorded, and then they wander over and they interview her immediately afterwards. Is
mhm,
that something you find when you're at conventions? There are people that
all
have
the
never
time,
not really part of the community, but they come there looking for an answer or to tell their
all the
story, as
time.
sympathetic
Oh,
is.
half of ever again, I speaking for myself and just in a few other people that I know, at least half of the accounts that we have are people who are like, "You can't use my name. Please don't talk about this beyond, but this is what happened to me. I just wanna know what happened. What is this thing that occurred to me?" The vast majority of people that I have spoken to, they will not let you use their real name because they don't want anyone to know this happened to them. The number of people who are willing to say, "I'll go on the record because I want people to know that it's real," is very, very small. And I would say that even of the people who have come to talk to you and say, just what's going on? What did I encounter? What's happening in my life? That's a very small number of people. I honestly think that, again, I can't say that it's a majority per se, and if it is, I can't say if it's 51% or 70%, right? But I think a lot more people have encountered the Fortean phenomena than we realize, because I think a lot of people see it and they're like, okay, I'm putting this to the side. I don't know what to do with it, right? And they're like, I like my life the way it is. I'm just gonna compartmentalize this event and put it in a little box, and I'm gonna step away from it as fast as I can because I don't want anything to do with it. And they don't ever talk about it. And if it ever comes up, they're like, I don't want to talk about it. Or, they may tell one or two people, they get laughed. They're like, okay, fine, I don't want to deal with it. I think that's a much larger section of of the world population than we realize. Then you have the very, very few who are like, I saw this, this is what happened, and they're willing to be very public. But then you have that part in the middle where they're like, I don't know what to do with this. Can you please just tell me why, how do I make my life make sense with this thing in it? Yeah, happens all the time. All the time.
That says there's something fundamentally different about our reality than consensus
Mhm,
reality would have us believe, because it's one thing to say, well, there's X amount of, 1,000 Bigfoot sightings a year. I don't even know what the figure is. But if
mhm,
you're correct in what you say, and I suspect you really are, if that figure is really maybe only 1 in 10 are reported, or 1 in 100 are reported, or something, then people are seeing Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts and Blessed Virgin Marys and fairies and all kinds of weirdness
mhm.
far more than even the Fortean record would let us
Oh,
know, because
absolutely.
it's not
Mhm,
reported. So
mhm.
what does that say about reality? If the majority, if
Yeah.
a small majority, whether it's small or a large majority, whether it's 51 or 70% of people have encountered
Mhm.
something, that says something. Our reality is fundamentally different to what we've been taught our reality is.
And again, that's why I think there is such opposition to a lot of this material, right? People ask, well, why isn't, where are these billionaires going? You can find funding to have dozens of people go out and study ocelots for years at a time. Where's some guy funding, Bigfoot research for a couple hundred grand a year? Like, that's hard. It's hard to find any funding on this. No one's rich researching Bigfoot or any of this Fortean phenomena per se, because ultimately money goes where the power is, and the power likes the narrative of that we see in the mainstream, just straight up. These are not these, Fortean phenomena calls a lot of that into question, and so that's not going to get the money, and so to a point, we have a lot of people running around saying, "What's happening to me?" And again, uh, Bigfoot's strange enough to talk about from a scientific perspective, from a cultural perspective, from a religious perspective, but guys, there is phenomena out there that makes Bigfoot look tame. Even the weird stories about Bigfoot seem absolutely tame by comparison, because you could, Joshua Cutchin famously said, there isn't a physical theory or materialist theory that a cryptozoologist hasn't loved when it comes to Bigfoot, right? And it comes to a lot of this stuff, even the really, really wild stuff. But man, I am telling you guys, there's stuff out there, and it's not one random person who's high seeing these things. It's dozens and dozens of people in different scenarios, and they're all like, "What was this really weird thing?" So to your point, it gets weird out there, and there's a lot of people who are looking for answers, and Bigfoot is one of these really weird things that kind of calls your reality into question. And yeah, these people go to these conferences, they go to researchers because they're like, please help me to understand and process what I just went through.
I wonder if consensus reality and our social structure could even hold if all of a sudden it was like, if
Hmm.
Fox and CNN was saying, we've just discovered that the world is filled with angels and ghosts and Bigfoot and goblins and, all of these different things. It was just
Hmm.
it'd be pretty hard to get up and go to work every day for a lot of people anyway.
Yeah.
If the world
No.
if it was
Yeah.
accepted that the world was that haunted, would you still be able to take meaning in, I don't know. Maybe you could, I'm not sure, but I mean, I'd find it hard.
Hmm.
I would think more people would opt out if all of a sudden the walls of
Hmm.
reality just crumbled.
Yeah. I, you know what? We've been talking a lot about this on the other channels, my other shows. Yeah. This is one of those things where I do, well, like you, I wonder if people really understood what was out there, right? And understood that the question was much bigger than they realized. Would Marvel movies still hold the same intent? Right? Or would going to Disney World occupy that same space? Maybe it would, but I tend to think that people would reassess a lot of things about what they saw, what entertainment they consumed. I think a lot of that would start, they'd be like, whoa, maybe I need to be a little bit more cautious about what I'm watching. Because if the nature of the universe isn't as materialist as we've been led to believe, maybe things have more meaning. Maybe you'd be a little bit more cautious with what you said to other people, right? Maybe you'd live life a little bit differently. Maybe you would ask bigger questions. And I think that's very much why a lot of these things are opposed, is because there's a lot of people who make a lot of money on you not asking bigger questions.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case, and it's also maybe it's just a safety net mechanism built into the bigger social structure by ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Maybe
Yep.
we don't even need, I'm not saying there mightn't be some type of, overarching conspiracy theory, but maybe you wouldn't even need that. Maybe if you think of society as an organic body to a
Hmm.
degree, maybe it self-regulates. Maybe it's like we cannot survive and have people make the bread and clean the sewers if we know that there are there are goblins around
Hmm.
every corner. Best not to acknowledge that. But what I to get back to the film, perhaps
Yeah.
before we say
Or
goodnight.
pay them as little as we do to do those things.
Exactly. Yeah, it'd be pretty hard to work minimum wage if you thought there was a goblin in your bedroom every night. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe we'd function anyway. But to get back to the film, I think that's in a way it's related to
Hmm.
the film, to the sense that this film is a look at people who do believe that reality is that strange, or at least that
Yeah.
there's hairy hominids roaming the world, which to me is as strange a concept as anything which I just proposed. And
Yeah.
I think there's real value in looking at and having an objective, kind look at what people think about the unusual, and to look at it from a cultural perspective of somebody who is taken Bigfoot on as a cultural metaphor for other things which haunt us in our society. There's real value
Yes.
in that. There's real value. Now I know Marty's watching, so it sounds like I'm saying it for him, but I was saying it at the beginning of the show. There's so much value in that kind of approach. And to understand
Hmm.
that people can take that type of approach to this, to understand the cultural setting of these belief systems.
Yes. Completely agree. Again, this is a very different film that takes a very different perspective from what people are used to. I think that's ultimately its value, is that this is, like you said at the very beginning, this is not about Bigfoot per se. This isn't even about researchers. It's about the people, and the people living in this community, the people um, working in it, and just, it's about the people and the impact on their lives. And I think it's a beautiful thing in that way.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably as good a way as possible to end this show, because I agree with you. Again,
Yeah.
Jason.
Well, you've got good taste, so how could you not?
Well, maybe we both do. One day we're gonna, like, throttle each other on this over something on this show. There'll be a big
I'm
drag.
trying to find something because it can't always
I
be this love
know. We
fest.
can't always agree.
There's got
We
to be something. Again, there's probably something out here that we're gonna go toe to toe on. I'll find it, even if I have to make it up. If I actually completely agree with you, I'll still find the opposing position and yell at you on it. We'll find it. We'll find it. It's there.
they're waiting the audience are waiting for it. They want us to eventually get to the
Hmm.
level where it's fisticuffs at an arena in Texas
Oh yeah, yeah. I
or in
wish
Wisconsin.
the old sportatorium was there. I'd take you down.
There you go. Well, I guess on that cheery note, it's good night from this mysterious librarian.
Yep. And as always, we will see you behind the card catalog. See you next time.